The following episode of the Milcam Sessions contains sensitive and mature subject matter. Listener discretion is advised.
Okay, we're starting.
Greetings, listeners! Welcome to episode 2 of the Milcam Sessions. I am the Mill in the Milcam Sessions. This is the Cam in the Milcam Sessions.
Hello.
And we have three stories for you tonight. A little bit of a different range of topics. I will say, especially with the first story, it deals with some very heavy subject matter, i.e. murder and SA of children. So I just want to again reiterate that listener discretion is advised. And if you're okay to move on from that, I hope that you enjoy the video. And first and foremost, because these two stories actually deal with the subject of murder, I really hope that Cam and I are able to do justice for the victims, for their families, for anybody who knew them, and basically give these stories the spotlight that they deserve. And without any further delay, here is story number 1, which is a murder in Thunder Bay from 1984, the murder of Scott Dove. At approximately 8 a.m. on October 31st, 1984, 17-year-old Scott Dove made the journey, as many other high school students did, to attend his classes at Lakeview, now St. Ignatius High School. He was driving a 1966 four-door Pontiac, black in color. The following day, Scott's father became concerned, and Scott was reported missing to the Thunder Bay Police Service. On November 8th, Scott's vehicle was located by police, thanks to a tip from a concerned citizen. The vehicle was located on the property of the Lakehead Psychiatric Hospital. It was found with the doors unlocked, but the keys were missing. The Pontiac was in fact on the property 3 days prior, November 5th, 1984. At that time, efforts to locate Scott were unsuccessful, with local media widely publicizing the case. Roughly 1 month after Scott's disappearance, in December 1984, a couple walking their dog in a quarry, which was a common party spot for teenagers, just off of Copenhagen Road, made a horrifying discovery: the body of the missing Scott Dove, which appeared to be hid with very minimal effort. Investigators believe that Scott was murdered somewhere else and his body was dumped in the quarry sometime later. Scott's cause of death was determined to be from injuries sustained from a violent confrontation with one or multiple individuals. It was also evident that Scott fought valiantly against his attacker or attackers before succumbing to his injuries. In 1986, a coroner's inquest into Scott's murder was held. At the inquest, testimony from 2 witnesses was heard stating that a suspect in the murder, Gary Lamont, had threatened them with death for speaking to police about the case. Lamont's attorney halted the testimony of these 2 witnesses 2 days later, but Gary Lamont was nonetheless publicly named as a suspect in the murder of Scott Dove. In 2015, Gary Lamont would be charged with sexual assault against 5 male victims ranging in age from 17 to 24. The assaults occurring within a 14-year period, 1993 to 2007. The charges were as follows: 7 counts of sexual assault, 2 counts of assault, 1 count of forcible confinement, 1 count of sexual assault with a weapon, 1 count of administering a stupefying drug, and 5 counts of uttering threats. A guilty plea was reached in November 2015, where 12 of the charges were dropped in favor of 5 charges of sexual assault. Lamont received 5 years, 1 year for each victim, in February 2016. Dolly and Mervyn Dove, Scott's parents, were in attendance for the trial. And though this sentence was too lenient, in my opinion, and I'm sure others as well, I hope that Scott's parents, other family members, and friends find at least a small amount of closure.
So, I'm curious, Miller, what brought this case to your attention? Um, like, obviously, we're from Thunder Bay, but this was a very interesting case and lots to discuss because, um, 5 years for this sounds like an incredibly, horrible, shady person. I guess they're still around, so I'd have to say like allegedly, but I mean they were convicted of these terrible crimes. But yeah, maybe I'll throw it back to you. Like, what put this case on your radar?
So this is a case actually that my mom would bring up from time to time, like when I was growing up, and if I got together with her at any point, she would bring it up periodically, and I just thought it was interesting, but I didn't have the full picture. So before I started doing the research into Scott Dove and then his basically publicly confirmed killer, Gary Lamont. Like, I didn't know about this whole thing with Gary Lamont at first. I basically had the understanding that Scott Dove's murder wasn't solved, and it kind of just made me think, okay, wow, like this is very interesting. I obviously have somewhat of a connection to the area where Scott Dove's car was found, and it's also interesting that the story that I shared last week about the glitch happens in relatively the same area. So that was kind of my thought, is that I want to get more answers to this or see if I can find any information. It was hard, honestly. Researching that was really challenging. I think the best piece of information that I found was an article that CBC had done on the anniversary. I think it was around 30 years after the murder happened. And then I was fortunately able to find some Thunder Bay Courthouse documents through online research as well, which tied everything into Gary Lamont. And it really bothered me to know that the public more or less confirmed that he did it, which, okay, fine, you're guilty in the court of public opinion. That doesn't really carry any weight. But
right.
the fact is, he has a documented history of uttering threats to people, whether it's discussing the murder of Scott Dove, saying that, they're going to go to the cops, or in the case that he actually was convicted of, uttering threats to these victims of these innocent children, that were the victims of Lamont as well. So, my heart goes out to Scott Dove's parents, because, they were at the trial. They went through, like, cause what I don't like about the justice system, like, I know I'm going off on a bit of a tangent, but, when victims have to either testify or they have to sit through a trial, they're basically being re-exposed to that trauma again, and it really got to me. And, being a father myself is another reason why I was really drawn to this, because I just couldn't imagine if something like that happened to my son, where, he's doing something that normal teenagers do, driving on his way to school, and then all of a sudden he's just gone. And, his body is found by hikers. They're taking their dog for a walk, just a mundane activity. Again, I can't imagine how they must feel, right?
Yeah.
Because you're doing this simple thing that you've done, hundreds of times probably, and then you stumble onto that. Like, I sincerely hope that they got counseling if they felt that they needed it, or able to kind of work through the trauma of finding a body, because it's not something that I would wish on anybody. And I know you brought up the point too, and I agree with you. For what Gary Lamont was convicted of, I mean, 1 year for each victim, like, I don't agree with that. It absolutely should have been, less than what I would consider a slap on the wrist, because if there's multiple victims, and I don't have the, I guess I don't have the patience or the understanding for people that commit crimes like that. I never have. Like, I have a social service worker background, and I remember even watching some of the rehabilitation practices for these offenders. And I even said to my professor, I'm like, it's good to know what area of client you can work with. And I know for a fact that I can't work with clients like that. I would get way too upset. And it's just, again, it's impacted me even more having a father, or, having a son of my own. And I would be devastated if something like that happened to him.
It's, I don't know the full details of, why. It sounds like they took a deal, for this, like, slap on a wrist that he got with 1 year per person. Like, these are crimes that are very likely traumatizing each victim, and that's lifelong usually, and it can be improved, and you can help with that trauma, but it doesn't always go away entirely. But also, it's just like this guy, this Gary Lamont has this history of dodging, getting, doing time for his crimes, basically. Because, I guess, like, we have to say allegedly for what happened with Scott Dove, but that's incredibly suspicious. And I was very curious, like, did the police not feel they had a good case? I mean, it is somewhat circumstantial evidence that two people are saying, oh, he's threatening them not to talk about the Scott Dove case. But, like, was there, like, no, DNA evidence? Is there no way you can, like, revisit this? It definitely puts him, as me, like, who's just heard the story from you, it sounds like this guy should be at the very top of the list of suspects. And, I don't know why it was just kind of, resolved.
That's just it. Like, it makes me wonder what type of potential DNA evidence they had. Because, I mean, I can't say that they would have been able to do anything with DNA, because, I mean, Thunder Bay's a small town, right? So I feel like if this case happened in Toronto in the 80s, they may have had a better opportunity to utilize DNA evidence.
Miller, did you know that, well, I guess I don't know if this was around in the 80s, but there's like a DNA lab, like a paleo DNA lab, where they send DNA samples from, like, forensic cases to Thunder Bay.
Yeah, that's the thing. I know of that now, but that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know if that was available in 1984. But my point is, like, you would hope that they would do their due diligence to even think, okay, if we have something that could be potentially used for evidence later, why not freeze it? Keep it in storage and then go back to it. Because what I have a hard time understanding too, and when I research this case, is, okay, you've got witness testimony, which, you're right, it's circumstantial. But why is this not being investigated any further? Because the thing is, I've heard this from many of true crime shows, which is obviously not the best source, but this part is factual. There's no statute of limitations on murder. So if you feel that he did it and he's still alive to be potentially prosecuted, what's stopping them from going, okay, let's open this case again, let's review it, and see if we can come up with a conviction and give more of an element of closure to the family and to the friends that have been without their loved one for, nearly, going on 45 years now almost. Like, it's
Yeah.
it's wild. Some things definitely don't add up. And, like I said too, the fact is we knew that he had other other crimes that he has been convicted of and had a very light sentence. Like, it's hard because you can go down the conspiracy rabbit hole. Part of me wonders, was this potentially police incompetence at the time? Was it that he knew someone, maybe in law enforcement, or in a quote unquote high place where these things maybe got swept under the rug, or just never bothered to be investigated? It's very hard to say. That's why I say I hate being speculative, but when you don't have a lot of information to go on, it's kind of all you can do.
There's really not that much info. And, other factors that, just raise an eyebrow for the case are, so I guess his Scott Dove's car was found at the LPH, the Lakehead Psychiatric Hospital, a few days before it was found, before it was left there. Does that mean he was there for some reason before his vehicle was dropped off there?
Yeah, it's hard to say because his car was found close to his destination. Because I know I had brought up before, the LPH is very close to what was known then as Lakeview High School, now St. Ignatius. So it makes me wonder if something happened to him in that genuine vicinity, and if Gary or whoever else may have been involved, because again, it's speculative that Gary was involved. We can't say that he was for sure.
Yeah.
But did something happen to Scott there? And then obviously his body was transported, based on what the police report had said, to the rock quarry on Copenhagen Road. But what I also found interesting when I was researching this was the fact that there was very minimal, if any, effort at all, put to hide his body. It's almost like they wanted it to be found, almost like making a statement. And okay, I know I'm making a bit of a stretch here, but a person who's going to threaten somebody with intimidation for talking about a case, strikes me as the same type of person that would go, yeah, you know what? I committed a murder. Fuck, look what I did. This is almost like my statement, where if you cross me, this could happen to you. Like, that's kind of the vibe I'm getting when I was putting those pieces together.
See, I wondered about if maybe things happened in a rush, or the killer or killers were disturbed and they weren't able to properly hide the body, or I think it could have been some other thing, some rushed thing. Also, it is bizarre, his car being at the LPH, because I don't think anyone would want to dump the car there, because it's a public institution, and they know someone would eventually notice it there. There are better places to dump a car, is what I'm saying, basically. You can dispose of it. So I do wonder if Scott parked there himself, but I guess there were no keys found. I would need a lot more information, and it sounds like there just hasn't been a ton of motivation on the part of the police in Thunder Bay to really, be transparent and give the public what clues they have. And it feels fishy. It does feel like, as you say, maybe there's some reason for them not to be motivated to solving this case. They're not as motivated to prosecuting this other guy to a very stringent level, only giving him a slap on the wrist. Do we know anything about Gary Lamont and like what his role in the community was?
That's not really anything I've been able to find either. The only thing I really was able to come across was the most recent convictions that he had, which started around 2014 and went through to 2016. And I know this isn't a reliable source either, but when you look up the murder of Scott Dove, one thing that does come up is there's a Thunder Bay Reddit community, and they'll talk about it. And I know one person actually had made a post where they said they went to Gary Lamont's house in the 80s with an older brother, and the older brother had purchased narcotics from Lamont, at least from what I had read. And even then, he offered the younger brother narcotics. Like Gary offered the younger brother narcotics as well, based on what the post had said, but also even came across as threatening then. Like, if you tell anybody that your brother is buying from me, there could be consequences, like that sort of thing. Just that's kind of the impression that I got. So it's hard to say what, if any, impact he had on the community that was positive, because I haven't been able to find anything. But I
was more curious about like if he was employed or what did he have a family, or was he still selling drugs? That is what I was kind of curious about.
No, that's fair. I wish that I could have gotten more information in terms of that, just to know what he had been doing, and maybe if he had found a way to, quote unquote, go under the radar, if he had like a regular 9-to-5 job, more or less, or something like that. But it's another one of the aspects of the case where there's not a lot of information that I could find on that. I mean, I'd have to try to track him down and speak with him. But it's like, I don't know if he's still incarcerated potentially for something else, because I mean, his sentence would be over by now. I think by this,
it would have been over in like 2021 or something.
Yeah. So it's hard to say. And I mean, the problem with me, which I know I've established before, being visually impaired, transportation, and trying to track someone down is not exactly easy for somebody like me. But I do hope, with as minimal information as I was able to gather, I hope that I was able to, kind of paint a bit of a clear picture as I can, and help to provide maybe some level of justice to Scott Dove and his family, because this is definitely a case that, got to me with the fact that, it's a family that's looking for closure for the murder of their son. And when they potentially felt like they could have got it, it was only partial, and it wasn't even really for the crime of murder. It was for something completely different. It just so happened that, Scott Dove's parents were at that particular trial, to see what kind of justice he would get, right? So it's, again, something that I wish I could find more information about. Maybe something like this could help to spark that. That would be fantastic if somehow we had a way for the podcast to help kind of jolt the police and, to getting back into this case. Because again, it's not fair for a family member to go with all these unanswered questions. And what always gets me in cases like this, as the family is yearning their whole rest of their lives to get closure, and then they unfortunately pass away, and then they never get that closure.
Right. I don't think it's possible to fully even imagine or understand what they would have gone through and what they're still going through with the loss of their son. It's clearly something that's still on their mind, because they're attending Gary Lamont's court case. I think that proves that they, and I'm, of all the people that would have followed this case very closely and been aware of everything, it was probably his parents. Doesn't mean that they know all the details, but for them to really feel strongly that he was the killer, it does kind of say something. It does, paint him as a very highly suspicious person for this particular case.
Exactly. And, again, there's that same pattern. Whether you find it in a credible source like the CBC article or the Thunder Bay courthouse filings, or something that's anecdotal like from Reddit, that pattern of threatening behavior is always there. Yeah. Right? Whether and it's it's the whole kind of you're not going to tell anybody, right? Because if you do, you're going to do this. And I was going to say, I meant to bring this up, like with your point about the rush of hiding the body. I mean, that does definitely lend credence to, because I know in the research, obviously I mentioned it in the story, this is a party area on Copenhagen Road. So maybe they could have heard something, maybe they saw car headlights pulling in. It's really hard to say, but either
also kind of begs the question, why, was he killed because was he killed there and not moved, or was he brought there? And it doesn't feel like you would want to bring someone to a place where it's a party area. So I do wonder if he was brought to a party there and then killed, and then they hastily did something, like didn't hide his body very well, or as you said, if it was trying to send some kind of message, then that could that would be a place where he would be found. It's really hard to say.
That's the thing. Is that's why I wanted to kind of shed a bit of light on this case, because it's unfortunately ambiguous, and there's a lot of theory and speculation as to what happened to Scott. But like I say, I sincerely hope that somehow they can find a way to get this case reopened and potentially explore prosecution and be successful, because like I say, his family certainly deserves having that closure and knowing that there's finality to it. It's obviously not going to bring their son back, because that's just a loss that you never truly get over. I mean, I've never experienced it myself personally, obviously, but I can't imagine, right? Because even the natural order of things, you're not supposed to die after your children. And, I'm sure there were all these moments that they probably would think, well, Scott would be this age now, like he should be here, potentially getting married, potentially having children of his own, where they don't have that. And, closure is kind of the next best thing. So they at least don't have to wonder, what happened to my child all these years later.
Right. Yeah. I think, it's important to honor his memory, like his parents and his friends and, other family. They had a short bit of time with him, and they have memories of Scott. But yeah, as you said, there's no bringing him back, unfortunately. And I think like a take home also, would be to, even a town like Thunder Bay. I guess I shouldn't say a town like Thunder Bay even, because, it's actually known to be like the murder capital of Canada. So it's a rough town. But I think you can think, well, it's a small town, and if you're familiar with it and all that you're safe. But there are a lot of shady elements to Thunder Bay, and in many ways it's a dangerous place to be.
That's just it. And I mean, it's hard to speculate, what happened if Scott and his attackers, if they had some sort of argument that led up to it, if it was if there was some other type of motive. It's hard to say if there's like a potentially a female involved, if maybe Scott had seen something that he shouldn't have. Again, it's very ambiguous in so many ways, and that's why I would like to see if there was some way that they could get a clear picture as to what happened to him fully, as in who did it. And I know one of the points that you brought up before was, how do they know that he fought valiantly? And it makes you wonder, like, was it with a type of weapon that someone was using? Was it, just fists and feet, causing the grievous injuries to Scott? Again, there's so many questions about every aspect of this case. And and I hope that, answers will come eventually. But in many cases like this, it's unfortunate, but those answers don't come.
I think the best shot would be like, if there was like someone interested in doing like a more fulsome documentary, or like CBC coming in and like deeply investigating it, that could get more of a picture of what happened, and put things more fully into context.
Exactly. It'd be nice, to see a program like from the CBC, like the Fifth Estate, devote an episode to to this case, because there's a lot to unpack. And it's one of those instances where it's like, you're given a puzzle and you're not given all the pieces, right? And you're expected to put it together with what you have, and a big chunk of this is missing. And not just that, but you have a potential suspect, in your, basically at the top of the list publicly, that has more or less, not been tried to the extent that I feel they should have, if there's strong enough evidence to prove that he was the actual perpetrator. But I will say, I'm glad that we, as a small platform for now, can at least shed some light on that. And my hope is just to generate some discussion about this case, which hopefully could be like a ripple in a pond that kind of leads to something bigger potentially.
I would hope so. I think it's occurring to me that like another thing that makes it really hard to contextualize this is I'm really not at all sure what the motive would have been. Like, this is a young guy, like a kid. Like, I do think a path report would help. Was there signs of SA? Was there any substances in his system? Even like this statement that he seemed to have fought valiantly. Like, maybe there was blood under his fingernails. Sometimes that's how they can tell that a victim was fighting back, or
or defensive wounds on his arms or his hands.
Because like it seems so random. It's like, okay, we know this guy, we know Scott, and we know this highly suspicious person who Scott's parents believe was very likely the culprit, and we know stuff about him, that he has multiple serial sexual assault convictions, and sounds like he was selling drugs. So how was he involved? How did these two, or again, it's just alleged. Like maybe this Gary Lamont fellow, was aware of something, but maybe he wasn't even the killer, or he was more tangentially involved. We really don't know. So like the details would be like really helpful for getting leeway to actually like solving this.
And that's the thing, right? Like the point that I keep coming back to for this is closure. It's
Yeah.
closure for the family and some level of finality, so that they have the opportunity, for the time that they have left, to just be able to pick up the pieces and kind of carry on with their life, with their lives as best as they can. And, I hope in some small way that our discussion and sharing of Scott's story will help to generate that. But on that note, I'm going to turn things over to Cam to introduce his story, which he actually has somewhat of a personal connection to, at least in the area where this story is to have taken place.
Yeah. So this is story 2. It was all triggered by one hike. So I'll start the story and we can discuss it afterwards. It was a small sign I found along the Tunnel Island hiking trail in Keewatin area of Kenora. It was affixed to a tree and said the following: The Wendigo Spirit Resting Tree. The dreaded Wendigo is the most horrible creature in the land of the Ojibwe Indians. Nothing strikes more terror into the hearts of the Anishinaabeg than the thought of Wendigo. The cannibalistic Wendigos strike from the north during the first moons of the winter, but have been known to attack during the summer, but this is very rare. The Wendigo was once a normal human being, but became possessed by a savage cannibalistic spirit. When a human is possessed by a Wendigo, ice forms inside the human body, hair grows profusely from the face, arms, and legs, and an insatiable craving for human flesh develops. When the ugly creature attacks, it shows no mercy whatsoever. This monster will kill and devour its own family to try and satisfy its lust for human flesh. The Wendigo is inhuman because of the powerful spirit of cannibalism residing in its own body. When a Wendigo has destroyed its own people, it will travel in a straight line across the forest until it finds the next group of victims. Usually high winds and blizzards accompany the Wendigo in its travels. It is said that the scream of a Wendigo will paralyze a man, preventing him from protecting himself. Sometimes an attack by a Wendigo can turn away a powerful medicine man, and this has occurred. There is a place at Sandy Lake, Ghost Point, that was marauded and destroyed by a Wendigo in the old days. Those remains of the village are still there today. Sit on this tree at your own risk. So long story short, I did not sit on the tree. I would take my rest on a different spot that hike. But later on, after the hike, I would look more into this peculiar sign. There was not that much online about this specific Wendigo resting tree. However, I did find multiple websites referring to Kenora as the Wendigo Capital of the world. I was intrigued about how it obtained this title, and my interest was piqued as this claim kept showing up. My curiosity ultimately led me down a rabbit hole, drawing me towards the story of an indigenous shaman named Jack Fiddler. Jack Fiddler was an Ojibwe elder and the chief of the Sucker Dodem people in the Kenora region. In 1906, at the ripe age of 87, he and his brother Joseph were arrested for the murder of Joseph's daughter-in-law. After their arrest by police, they were held in the district of Keewatin. The investigation prior to their travel revealed that Jack was renowned for his skill in killing the Wendigo, and he claimed to have killed 14 in his lifetime. Due to his renown, many local people sought him out for his service and expertise in taking care of Wendigo. Described by many as a gentle and dignified man, his demeanor did not match what the police had expected of a serial killer. Yet, despite his mild-mannered nature, 2 brothers were eyewitnesses to the killing of a woman, Joseph's daughter-in-law, who he believed was a Wendigo. More specifically, he believed she was in the final stages of turning into a Wendigo. She was sick and dying a slow, painful death, and according to legend, once she died, she would become a full Wendigo and would never be able to find the sweet rest of death. As she was clearly suffering, he felt a great deal of empathy towards the woman. In his mind, ending her life was a mercy killing that he strongly believed would also keep their community safe. For Fiddler to end her life, she had to be tied up with linen bands until she was immobile. The Ray brothers, the eyewitnesses to all this, testified to authorities, and later reported in Free Press Prairie Farmer that Fiddler, quote, throttled the life out of the wretched woman with a fatal cord. Throttled the life out of the wretched woman with the fatal cord. Her body was promptly burned on a pyre to snuff out the sinister winter chill that supposedly dwells deep in the heart of a Wendigo. Other recounted stories of Fiddler's Wendigo kills tell of a man strangled for being a Wendigo and later placed on a fire to burn. However, he was not dead yet and rose up out of the pyre. He thrashed and ran wildly through the camp in a horrified panic until he was put out of his misery by a shotgun blast. Another tale recounted multiple successive murders piling up due to Fiddler believing that the Wendigo spirit jumped into another body after a kill. Sometimes family would urge Fiddler to end a family member's life. Other times, a person who believed themselves to be a Wendigo would ask him for death themselves. Sometimes Fiddler even believed rival shaman would sick attacking Wendigo on him in the wild. He even once killed his own brother Peter on a trading expedition, as he too was becoming one of these creatures. With ritual upon ritual, murder upon murder, Fiddler claimed he took 14 lives over his long and notorious career, although some claim it may have been well over 30. The Fiddler brothers were tried and ultimately found guilty of murder. Jack Fiddler confessed to the murders, but claimed ignorance to the settlers' laws, saying, "I did not know what I was doing was wrong, and if I had known, I would not have done the deed." When all was said and done, he was sentenced to Stony Mountain Penitentiary, but spent most of his time in the hospital, as he was old and infirm by that time. He died not long after the trial. His brother Jack escaped captivity, but was unfortunately found in the forest, hanging from a tree shortly after, presumably by his own hand. The Sucker people were some of the last traditional indigenous people in North America at the time. They had not accepted Christianity, nor had they given up their ways. However, with the loss of Fiddler's strong leadership and the successive public outcry from this widely publicized trial, Fiddler's son, Robert, was forced to sign Treaty 5 only a few years later. With this treaty in effect, the Sucker people unfortunately ended up dispersing, with many ending up in Sandy Lake under Treaty 9. Often the obscure and obsolete term Wendigo psychosis refers to someone driven to a mental break after resorting to cannibalism and believing they've been cursed into turning into a Wendigo. However, this case seems to show a unique kind of dangerous delusion, with Fiddler's unchecked conviction about the need to end a person's life if they are infected with a Wendigo spirit. His belief proved to be highly dangerous and likely delusional in its own right. Now it remains unclear what exactly happened at Sandy Lake Ghost Point, the village that the little sign claimed to be marauded and destroyed by Wendigo. Was this referring to an attack from before or after the Fiddlers were arrested? Could these brothers have been staving off some great Wendigo evil which was ultimately left unopposed with their absence? With the passage of time, it becomes incredibly hard to suss out legend from reality. There have been multiple accounts from trappers and traders going centuries back of Wendigo roaming the deep woods of northern Ontario, Manitoba, and even northern United States. One relatively recent story from only a few years ago, this time in Sioux Lookout, about 3 hours drive east of Kenora, tells of one man hearing horrifying and otherworldly shrieks while out hunting in the deep woods one day. These shook him to his core, and he feared that this could be the Wendigo from ancient legend. Now, Kenora is situated on Lake of the Woods, and within one of the countless islands in the area, there is said to be a cave system where a Wendigo resided. Most Ontario Wendigo tales tend to be traced back to the land around this cave, and within the walls there is an enigmatic cave painting of a tall, broad-shouldered creature towering over a moose and a wolf. Regional beliefs, including a legend from the indigenous people of Dog River, say that caves are often thought of as entrances to the spiritual world. Perhaps there is some otherworldly creature that can enter and exit our realm, roaming and striking terror as it pleases. So, is the Wendigo still active in the region? Or was it always just a compelling myth? Was it fertile ground for an active imagination, or, at worst, a dangerous delusion? It is difficult to say. The Wendigo has taken on quite a different form in the mind of mainstream pop culture since then. Still, the spacious woods around Kenora and the expansive Lake of the Woods keep the legend alive and thriving. Because of this, the land seems ultimately fated to remain steeped in Wendigo mythology. Yeah, so very curious what you think. Again, it's not like anything supernatural or particularly frightening happened to me, but the personal connection was seeing this odd little sign, just out on this nature hike, this little trail, and then like go, as we do, go like down a rabbit hole and learn a lot more about the legend, the history, and I'm curious what you thought of it, Miller.
So I have to ask right off the bat, like when you went and saw the sign of the Wendigo spirit resting tree, I know you mentioned in the story that you didn't want to rest there. You chose to rest somewhere else. Was it kind of out of respect on what you were reading, or was it more of a feeling of, oh hey, if I rest here, like I kind of feel uneasy, because of the sign?
I didn't remember specifically having any uneasy feeling. It was merely just, I don't want to, push my luck. I think this was early on in the hike, and I was with another person, and we were going on this hike, and we were thinking like, there's still more to this hike left. It would be nice if we didn't encounter a Wendigo while we're out here. So yeah, it was basically a matter of just not pushing my luck.
No, that's fair. And as I go on into the story further, the one thing that strikes out at me is the fact that an 87-year-old man was able to strangle an adult woman, to the point of death. Because I mean, it takes a tremendous amount of force to be able to strangle somebody. And I mean, I don't know how many spry 87-year-olds there are, who are able to do that.
She was very ill and sick.
True.
So maybe that, like, and he had his brother assisting. So I don't know if that helped.
And I can't recall. They didn't mention his brother's age, did they? Because I know he's mentioned as 87, but I can't recall if there was any mention of how old his brother was.
I didn't see, like, I think it mentioned his brother was old too.
Okay, but not a specific age to know whether he was older or younger. It's just kind of a fine point detail. But the other thing with it too is knowing that he was explaining that he did this to 14 potential Wendigos, and mentions the story about tying up the potential Wendigo, and then doing the strangulation and then burning the body. I know some other Wendigo stories that I had come across. The fire is very significant because it's believed that a Wendigo's heart is frozen in ice, or potentially made of ice, which is part of their defining features. So it makes sense. But I still just find it remarkable that somebody, assisted or not, at the age of 87 would be able to strangle someone to that point and murder. But you can't help but think, and I know I'm going to make this joke as a Simpsons fan, but just I could picture the conversation. Just she wasn't a Wendigo. That was my sister-in-law. Yeah. Well, she was turning into a Wendigo, though. Like, I'm not trying to speak ill of the situation, but it just seems like a very interesting defense.
Yeah, and it was a very interesting defense. And I think, like, with this case, it's okay to have a bit more levity. Like, this was, like, well over 100 years ago. Nobody who knew anyone in this case is alive still. But, no, it was... So I also was, at first I was wondering about how he said, well, I didn't know that doing this was wrong. If I had known it was wrong, I would not have done that. And, I had wondered if that was like his lawyer telling him to say that. Um, but, or maybe he thought it would be its own defense, but it seems like kind of a huge cop out. Like, no, you either thought they were Wendigo and they needed to, you know, be murdered because they were dangerous, or you didn't believe that. Like saying, "Oops, I thought it was okay, but I didn't. I don't know these new laws of the European settlers, so if I knew that there was a law about not killing Wendigo, I totally wouldn't have done it." it, it felt a little bit weak.
It definitely could. It definitely could have felt weak. Like I don't mean to break in,
No, go ahead.
but I know what you mean. It does definitely sound like a weak defense when you look at it through a modern context. But part of what I got from that section was, maybe that's the truth, because he's used to following his own laws, the laws of his people. Um, you know the indigenous, the indigenous culture that he was a part of, and especially being uh, a chief and an elder and a leader among his
Mm.
people. Belief is a very powerful thing. So, it is. I feel it's as equally likely, especially in the times that this occurred, that he very well did believe that he was doing a service for the community and keeping the community safe by killing somebody who's potentially turning into a Wendigo, and also, doing a service for the person. Because I recall too that there was one incident where he mentions that there had been one reported person who told him that they wanted him to kill him because he didn't want to. He knew that he was going to become a Wendigo, and if you take the legend at face value, that would be a fate worse than death, because you're
Oh,
eternally starving, right? And no matter how much flesh you consume, you're still starving and becoming more and more gaunt and emaciated. Um, and I mean, the other the other part too, the other part of the story that got me. I know I'm kind of sputtering a little bit. I apologize, but
no, that's okay.
it's just because it's unbelievable to come across all of this. And I mean, I commend you for your research to all of this too. This is very detailed. Um, but the story of the other man that he had killed
Oh, yeah.
and burned, and then knowing that the guy somehow got out of the pyre, and then I can't help it because, like, when I was first reading and listening to that part, because I'm not sure if we've mentioned this previously, but we do take the time to read and listen to each other's stories before discussing them, just so we're not coming in cold, and making sure
Yeah.
that we do due diligence on both sides. But I couldn't help it. Like, part of me was almost reading the sentence before it was finished and be like, oh, did he just cover him in water? I'm like, oh, no, never mind. He blew him away with a shotgun. Okay, that makes a little more sense. Because I read it as put out, right? And I'm thinking, okay, did they put him out with water? I'm like, oh, no. They
No,
they
they took him
put him
out
out of his misery.
with the. Yeah, no, like it really conjures up like the image of this like horrible thing happening, of this poor man who's like burning to death, and then he, I guess thankfully in that situation, gets shot with a shotgun and kind of puts him out of his misery.
Yeah.
um and yeah, just to speak to what you were saying, I do, based on everything, I do lean towards thinking um he he did believe what he was doing. Like, I think he was convinced. Like, it sounded more delusional, like within like the cultural context, like within his stories and within things that he sees with his own eyes, like that people do get affected by the deep like northern cold, and the like intense fear of starvation, the intense like isolation of everything. Like, I'm sure he's it, I'm sure he does like think that Wendigo exists and he needs to, you know, kill them like when he encounters them. Just that one statement in court gave me pause at the time because I was wondering like, okay, so like it didn't quite match with that as much, but everything else it does seem like he really, you know, believed these things, and that's why, you know, I do wonder if this was Wendigo psychosis, but more to be a Wendigo hunter and rather than a Wendigo, like, you know, deeply believing that these things are needed. And you know, I thought the detail that um, at one point he was believing that the Wendigo spirit was like leaping out of someone he just killed and going into someone else, and it's like, okay, man, like you know that's getting pretty wild there. Like you're gonna be murdering so many people, and he's even, you know, had to kill his, you know, he thought he had to kill his brother because he believed he was turning into a Wendigo. And it it's really fascinating. I've and for anyone listening, like there is a wealth of Wendigo stories. If you look into Canadian and American legends, like there's quite a few. Because I actually got down this rabbit hole because I was curious if, like, you know, I wasn't thinking of going this deep, but I was just trying to Google and find if there was any like recent Wendigo stories that had some like legitimacy to them. And there's a lot that seem like very clearly like, you know, fictional. Like they're just a little too outlandish. You know, you can kind of sniff when it feels like it was more written, and you know, they have a bit of a, you know, this is a grade 10 student writing this for their creative writing, you know, session, and they pop it on Reddit or a Facebook, you know, community. So like it was hard to find anything that seemed like, you know, at least kind of like plausible. But there wasn't much even at all. But it did really bring me back to the past, you know, all these legends of the past. And, you know, shout out to, you know, Hammerson Peters. Like he's done quite a few really good Wendigo videos. And I don't think he's covered this one, or if he has, it's one I haven't seen. But it just goes to show that this was like a real issue. Like lots of people were thinking, you know, oh, I've, you know, consumed human flesh, I'm going to turn into a Wendigo. I'm going to be cursed to wander the forest and just go on killing and be like cold on the inside. And it was a real really at the forefront of a lot of people's minds. Like it was a big part of many indigenous legends. And it, yeah, just you know, interesting how it played into this this chief and his story, and you know, the sucker people. And because it, you know, it sounds like in all other metrics he was a very strong leader, which you know, beyond the one fact that he just, you know, killed 14 people or Wendigo, or you know, he was a positive figure otherwise. And then, you know, the fallout afterwards was rather unfortunate that they sort of disbanded.
Yeah, it actually leads into what I was going to mention next too. When I was looking into your research, I know you put some newspaper headlines, and one of the ones that jumped out at me, and I'm doing it as kind of a tie-in, because one of the remarkable things about the Sucker people is that they were one of the last, if not the last, to convert. You know, they fought against embracing Christianity, and I read a headline, and the first thing it says is, you know, devil worship among the Cree.
Oh yeah, they sensationalized it so hard.
Exactly.
You know, they didn't treat it with you know, solemnity or respect, or they didn't have any room or capacity to have like a nuanced discussion about, you know, cultural differences at that time. and it was just like devil worshippers, and people were, I'm sure, using it as evidence to push Christianity on these people.
Well, and it's that term, right, where anytime Christian missionaries would go into what they would consider, untamed land, they would always use the words like savages to describe them, because the culture is so different. And who are we to say what cultural beliefs are correct or not, and to impose our beliefs onto them? And I know, obviously, it was very impactful to the Sucker people, because of the fact that their chief had been taken away, and it's my understanding from your research that he passed away shortly after the trial, and he was in a hospital being enfeebled. And knowing that there's a connection between the loss of their chief and the chief's own son having to basically sign away the rights to the proper existence of their tribe, and to be absorbed into the Christianity, or into the Christian culture rather, and being forced to have their loved ones and go to residential schools and basically be stripped of their cultural identity. And it's all because their most powerful person was no longer there to support them. So it makes, and it's funny that you mentioned the word rabbit hole, because part of me wonders too, what grasp did Jack have on the English language? Because maybe he made up that story because he could have been coerced, as a potential possibility too. It's very hard to say, but it is also very detailed, and he mentions that he's renowned for being a Wendigo killer. But it's hard to say, because obviously this was over 100 years ago, and again, belief is a very powerful thing. If those beliefs can be changed, that can impact as well. But I do know, I meant to bring this up earlier, this actually reminds me a lot of Haitian ritual, where people will be affected by a curse from like a voodoo shaman, for example, and they'll believe that they're cursed, but they believe so powerfully in that curse that the symptoms that they manifest is just from the belief that they were cursed, because they were told they were cursed by a shaman. And it can lead to people having physical symptoms and the like. I also have to say too, go ahead.
Sounds like they can somaticize symptoms, and often we understand that psychosis is flavored by your culture. Like, I don't know if you've heard this, but in certain like Eastern cultures, having symptoms of psychosis, it's not always as uncomfortable. It's not always like as frightening. It almost kind of works into the more community-based culture and the spiritual beliefs, so that it's less it's a bit less distressing to have psychotic symptoms in some Eastern cultures. So it really flavors the delusion or whatever you're experiencing.
I kind of like that it's viewed as less distressing. I would honestly hope that North America could embrace some of that to the extent, because there's still that stigma around the mentally ill, and coming forward with struggling with mental illness still isn't something that's completely embraced. Like, we're making progress, but obviously it still has a long way to go. And I mean, if somebody's having some type of psychotic episode, whether it be the Wendigo psychosis where they feel they are one, or in Jack's case that he's having a delusion that those around him are becoming a Wendigo, because obviously the only one who could see through Jack's eyes would have been him. So we might see somebody who just looks sickly, like maybe she had some type of bacterial infection. Maybe she had some type of viral illness which made her look gaunt, or
Yeah.
it's very hard to say. And then they interpreted it as, signs of somebody becoming a Wendigo. But it's one of those things where, again, cultural beliefs play a very important role in a case like this, especially in those times where they weren't modern, and you didn't have the access to life-saving treatments, or the general understanding of what of illness, for example, right? Like to the level that we have now. I was going to say as well, I'm not sure how this may translate to the YouTube portion when this gets uploaded, but I really like that you had included some visual representation, like the drawing, the cave drawing of the Wendigo being taller than a moose, and then the wolf on the bottom. I thought that was just very fascinating.
Me too.
To know that it stretches back that far.
No, it was a true blue rabbit hole, like, because I really was trying to, I went into it with a question, okay, because I was looking through old photos, and I saw this sign that I took a photo of, and I was like, oh yeah, this tree from years back when I was on the Tunnel Island Trail in Kenora, and I read the legend again, and then I was, I was thinking of, a story to cover for this podcast, so I started to look up, the Wendigo, Kenora, and I saw it in several different spots. It was mentioning Kenora is the Wendigo capital of the world, and the first time I saw that, I was like, oh, okay, who decided that? But I just kept seeing it, and I don't think I got an answer about exactly who declared that, but it makes sense. It seems to be at least the epicenter of a pretty large region, including much of northwestern Ontario, a lot of Manitoba, a lot of maybe Minnesota, and the northern United States. But I was trying to just kind of get the sense of, okay, so is it, so it's the Wendigo capital of the world, then why? And it sounds like there were just so many legends about the Wendigo in this area, so many stories of people experiencing Wendigo psychosis that were found, and they truly believed they had turned into a Wendigo, and they had become cannibals. And I was really trying to link it to anything more modern, and I include that story from Sioux Lookout because Sioux Lookout's not that far from Kenora, and there was a fellow a few years ago, and he was out hunting, and he heard that that screaming in the woods that just sounded, I guess, very unearthly to him. And yeah, I mean, that would scare anyone. I wanted to keep an open mind. Yeah, maybe there is some spirit or some weird thing in the woods or something, but it's. And
the nice thing about.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
It's okay. The nice thing about that, I just wanted to make sure. I'm glad you brought this portion up. The nice thing about the Sioux Lookout encounter is we actually have something tangible with that. If you search it on YouTube, I believe you can actually get the video footage and hear the recording, because this is something that kind of went viral in northwestern Ontario. I know it was covered actually even on local news at one point. It was on TV Newswatch back at the time that it happened. And there is actually a YouTube clip where you can hear the sound for yourself and maybe come to your own conclusion. But yeah, if it's something that you're not expecting, because obviously you're going out there, you're going to hunt, you know what the animals that you're tracking sound like, what the other wildlife sounds like, and then to hear this unearthly screaming, that's just it's bone chilling, because I remember listening to that too. And I know I actually had a small encounter of something similar myself, but it's widely believed that what I had heard, and I actually have witnesses with me too. We were going on a hike up to the aforementioned Rabbit Mountain that I talked about in episode 1 of this podcast.
Yeah, the legendary Rabbit Mountain.
The legendary Rabbit Mountain. Yeah, we heard this weird kind of high-pitched baying, screaming sound, and I shared it on Facebook when it happened just to kind of get some ideas. And in my case, some people felt that it was the screaming of a male fox. Apparently, it's some type of mating call, but the scream that Cam had researched is nothing like that. But the only reason why I bring that up is because it's unfamiliar. I'd never heard a scream like that before. I'm glad I had an audio recording of it, just like this gentleman had when he had been out hunting in Sioux Lookout. And, you know, it's very hard to say without definitive proof what exactly that noise was, other than the fact that, yeah, it would be terrifying and throw off your entire experience because you're hearing something that, you know, is completely foreign to you. It's hard to tell where it's coming from. And, you know, what do? Do you follow it to try to figure out what it is? Do you abandon your hunt and, you know, go to a different area because, you know, who knows what you could encounter? It's very hard to say. And again, I encourage the listeners to look that up. And for those that need to know, Sioux Lookout is SIOUX, and then lookout is one word, just as it sounds. And you can probably type in something to the effect of, you know, Sioux Lookout scream or something to that effect, or Sioux Lookout, you know, scream in the woods or what have you. And I encourage any listener, you know, that follows this on YouTube, throw it down in the comments. You know, give us kind of your thought of what that scream sound would be. Yeah. And if you have any stories of your own of potential encounters with something where it's a potential of a Wendigo or even something like a skinwalker or any other Indigenous legend, we'd love to hear it and potentially want to use that as another podcast topic.
Yeah, we're always looking for topics, and I think for our second episode, like we were like going back and forth about like what we wanted to do with it, and I think what we want to do is we want to keep it open. We want to do what we're interested in and what we want to talk about, and you know, maybe we'll have, you know, more themed episodes in the future. But whereas our first episode we knew we wanted to do you know, all personal stories, this one was very open, you know, to like, well, where do we go now? And it lended to the rabbit hole that I went down. And yeah, if any of our viewers wants to set me or Miller down another rabbit hole by, you know, commenting something very interesting, you know, we welcome it. But
exactly.
I think we should maybe move on to our last story of the night.
So this is something, again, I like having a personal touch as an end. So this is actually the main story that got me intrigued in wanting to do potential narration or podcasting. So I'm very thankful to Cam for allowing me to share it. And it's something he's familiar with because I brought this story up to him on a few different occasions, and we've had some open discussion about it. And it's a personal encounter to me, which does have a true crime theme to it as well, which is why I figured it would be ideal to put it here as story number 3 on the second episode. And it's a little more, dare I say, like, it's still traumatizing and, you know, kind of scary in the moment, but it's something that I feel I can, you know, kind of look back on and laugh now that a few years have passed and nothing negative has come from it. So I hope you guys enjoy the story of what I call the Pruner Man. This incident occurred in 2019. I live in Northern Ontario, Canada, in a semi-rural area. It was around 5 p.m., and I was eagerly awaiting my son's arrival for a visit. I have a shared custody agreement with his mother. I have a standard poodle who is not a scary dog by any means, but she does her job by barking as soon as anyone walks down our road, let alone walks onto our property. So, When she started barking, I naturally assume my ex has pulled into the driveway with my son, and I make my way out to greet them. Only it wasn't her car. Rather, it was a middle aged, disheveled looking man with long, stringy gray hair and eyes with pupils as big as saucers, who was creeping around my house. When he caught sight of me, I can tell he was nervous. To give you a visual, I'm a rather intimidating looking guy. I have long hair, a full beard, and I've had friends tell me that I look like a serial killer. Hence my nickname, Serial Miller. The guy starts stammering, saying, "Oh, I was wondering if you needed any pruning done. I could do it for you, even though it's late in the season in most people's minds." I politely declined, and fortunately, the guy left. My ex arrived with my son shortly thereafter and told me she saw a guy who was, quote, twitching out, and advised me to keep my son inside for at least a little while. I, of course, did just that. Even if I hadn't gotten the extra piece of information, as I have a visual disability, so I could not see his twitching movements from a distance, what I could see of him gave me the creeps. I called the cops and advised them to be on the lookout. I also posted my encounter in our local Concerned Citizens Facebook group, and when I did, I was informed that I was not the only one who had an encounter with the Pruner Man. I shudder to think how different the circumstances would have been had my son encountered him before I did. I hope this guy is caught and arrested, or provided with mental health support, or even helped to find some honest work. His demeanor did not give me the latter vibe. In an update on the Pruner Man, it turns out that this guy is part of a gang who commit break and enters in and around my area. The gang sends one person to scope out a potential target home, then send in a group to break into the house. I'm happy to report that they have not shown up here, and I think it's because of my loud, hypervigilant poodle.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing the famous Pruner Man story, which you've told me this story a few times, so I'm familiarized with it. And yeah, it's definitely like it fits securely in the let's not meet territory, right?
Yeah, exactly. And what got me at that time too was just the timing of everything. Unfortunately, the dog that I mentioned in the story, it was a poodle named Charm, and she passed away in 2023. But I was really thankful to have her there that day, because otherwise I wouldn't have known that this man was here, and wouldn't have known what his intentions were to go outside. But she was so vigilant. Like, I know even Cam had come over to my house, and as soon as a vehicle pulls into the driveway, or as soon as somebody steps on the property, she's looking out the window. Hyper vigilant dog. She would know instantly and just start barking. So, she would bark when my son would come for a visit. So I figured, okay, it's got to be him. I'm going to come out and collect him, and we'll do our what we want to do in terms of playing outside or what have you, because it was a really nice summer day. Like, it was in June. I remember, like, just perfect blue sky, probably 25 Celsius above, somewhere around there. But it's just really odd that this man shows up, and literally, with myself being visually impaired, if I can see that his eyes have hugely dilated pupils, those are big.
He was. It sounds like he was definitely high, maybe on a stimulant of some kind, and that's maybe why he was like tweaking when your ex-wife saw him. But yeah, no, it is like a near miss too, because it was such a beautiful day. You definitely would have taken your son outside, or it would have been highly likely that you would have, and it would have been much more terrifying if he was with you when you encountered the Pruner Man. Luckily, you were alone, but you had a dog with you.
Well, that's the thing. She wasn't with me. She was still inside, but it was her that's okay. It was her bark that kind of alerted me to go, okay, I'm going to go outside. Cause I'm the type of person where when I get to spend time with my son, like I want to get every last second that I can. So as soon as I heard an inkling of a vehicle or a person, I thought, okay, I'm going to go out there and take a look. And I do feel that what helped me is, I look like an intimidating person. And I've said that in the story because, I've got long hair, I have a long beard. I don't tend to, I don't tend to smile all the time. So like, I kind of look like I'm, angry, even though Cam can attest for the most part, I'm a pretty, easygoing, kind of happy-go-lucky guy. I joke around about almost everything.
But I attest to that.
But I feel like my look helped because, I wasn't somebody who looked, meek or defenseless or, could be easily intimidated. And that's why I even had to articulate it in the story that as soon as he started talking to me, he immediately started stammering as if to be like, now I'm screwed because I've got to talk to this guy who, probably isn't going to believe my story, who looks like, he could potentially kick my ass.
Yeah.
And it was, I'm glad that I was able to remain calm and, listen to him because I have a background in customer service for a number of years, and that's actually how Cam and I met. We worked together at a call center briefly, but we remained friends ever since. And I use that same demeanor. I use the customer service voice with him. I was very calm. I was very polite and just kind of told him, hey, I'm not interested. But I still was left unsettled. So I had to share it and get some, do some research on it and just ask anybody else, like, hey, have you guys dealt with this? And to find out that other people have, and to know that there was this group of, criminals who basically ran this operation in my area, to go and have somebody come in to scope out a potential property, and then if they feel it's a good target home, to send other people in to basically do the deed and commit a break-in. That to me is terrifying. Because just imagine if I wasn't home and then came home and noticed that the house was trashed, or what if this happened to an elderly lady, for instance, right, where it was like this vulnerable potential quote unquote easy target. It was a lot. Like, I'm, as much as I wish I hadn't met the Pruner Man, I'm actually glad that I was the one that met him instead of somebody else. The only thing I would have, I wish that I would have done differently is just not sat on the potential reporting of it, because in the moment I was focused on my son arriving and spending time with him rather than calling the police right away. I actually waited until he went to bed my son went to bed that night and then called, and just called on like the non-emergency. But I try not to think about if there were any other potential encounters that could have happened after mine, or what became of it. But it was definitely something that stuck with me. And just seeing this guy who's completely out of it. Like, I would think too, if you're running an organization like this, you probably don't want to have a guy who's going to get high on a supply before he goes to scope out a house. It's not really ideal.
Not very ideal at all. But yeah, no, it is. It's a very creepy thought, because it's you're at home, you're in a place that should be a very safe environment, but you never really know who's skulking around. If there's like a dark area, or I know there's like some like green space around your place, like some bushes or trees. You really don't know. All you can see is like the lawn parts and like the driveway, and you have to keep your wits about you a little bit and be just like aware. You can never fully 100% let your guard down, even if you're at home.
That's just it. It's always important to be vigilant. And in this case, if you can't be vigilant, it's nice to be able to have a dog that was, and and helped kind of make this easier. And I mean, I know too, like where I live is semi-rural, so it's on It's on about 5 acres of property. And, Cam's been here too. One of the things that I partake in is axe throwing. And, part of me almost wishes that I had that too, but obviously I didn't need it, which I'm thankful for. But just knowing that, I was able to kind of handle that as well as I could have. And just being thankful again to Charm, rest in peace for what she did for and again, just knowing that in that way I was able to keep my son safe was, the most important thing, because he was really young back then. Like, he would have been 4, I think. Yeah, he would have been 4. And, it's like, you wonder, like, he might have been impressionable. Or I would hope that if he did see him first, that he would run back to his mom or run back to me, just to kind of tell me, that he had seen this. Because, it was something that was very unsettling. And again, like I said, I can laugh about it now, because clearly this guy could have been on an episode of, Canada's Dumbest Criminals if they had such a thing. Because he was, not exactly the brightest bulb, or the a box of crayons that or not a complete box of crayons, whatever kind of analogy you want to use. But
who he did kind of remind me of, I know you're not a big movie guy, but in the movie The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, there's a creepy guy at the beginning that they just kind of pick up at the side of the road. He's a hitchhiker, but he just looks really he looks really kind of weird, and it's a bit of that vibe, a weird kind of stringy haired, maybe high guy that has suspicious intent about them.
Yeah. No, and that's the thing, right? We can always look back on something that we've seen, whether it be a TV show, movie, and kind of compare it. So I have seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, so that's something that I could definitely agree with. He also,
if you have character from that movie, though,
I do, now that you bring it up, actually.
Yeah.
Well, he also kind of reminds me of he seems like he would have fit in perfectly with one of the oddball characters from House of a Thousand Corpses, kind of just a cheesy kind of B-movie horror type character. But again, this was real life.
Maybe Rob Zombie should cast him in his next film, or bring him along on tour. I think he's touring.
I did say I wanted this guy to potentially find real work. So imagine if that's what it led to. He just gets to fucking tour with Rob Zombie, or be an extra in House of a Thousand Corpses. Oh God, or whatever.
So the Thousand Corpses 4 Electric Boogaloo or something.
House of a Thousand Corpses 4 Electric on the Floor. I don't know, but
there were 2 sequels to that.
I know. Yeah. Lords of Salem and then Devil's Rejects. I think I got the order wrong, but either way, I'm not a movie guy, so I can
Lords
get away with it.
Lords of Salem, I think, is different. So I think it was the Devil's Rejects and 3 from Hell or something like that.
That was it. Yeah. I forgot about 3 from Hell, actually, because I'd only seen House of a Thousand Corpses, and then I think I had seen. Oh my God, Devil's! Yeah, I think I've seen the Devil's Rejects once. That was with I actually saw House of a Thousand Corpses when it first came out, then rewatched it. That was with the ex, and then again I had seen the Devil's Rejects with her too, but I don't know, I could laugh
much for the second one. I thought the first one was solid enough, but. Yeah, I don't know. What did you think of it?
I don't know. I could laugh at them. They're kind of in a notch below some of the movies that are so bad they're good. If that makes sense. But yeah, it's one of those things. But it's funny, right? That you can take something in your life that's fictional and apply it to real life and just be like, oh yeah, this weird encounter with this person reminds me of a movie from either the 1970s or the early 2000s. Man, that is just That is just wild. And it's also kind of funny too. Like, I don't want to mention this guy's name, but I know you've probably seen him too. When I would do stand-up comedy, there was the guy that used to run it all the time. Like, yeah, like he kind of reminded me of him in a way too. But I mean, because having like the disheveled kind of stringy hair and things like that, and it's just, I don't know, it's absolutely bizarre to experience that. And I'm glad now again that I can just kind of laugh it off and more or less bring it up just to kind of share it with certain people and be like, yeah, this is the time that I potentially stopped a break-in.
I do wonder, like, the alternate situation of what if you were like, actually have some pruning work for you to do.
Funny that would.
Okay job, or would he have risen to the occasion, or killed everyone? Who knows?
Imagine they just put him to work. Just be like, yeah. Matter of fact, I want you to prune every goddamn tree on this property, and I'm going to be watching you every time you do it, and I'm going to have a knife with me. And if you don't do well, no, I'm just joking.
Yeah.
But just kind of turn the tables on him a little bit. But yeah, it's interesting to think like what would have happened if we would have said yes. But that's where I worry again, right? Like if it was an elderly person who maybe didn't fully comprehend what was going on, they could say yes, especially if it's something that they genuinely needed to have done. But it's kind of funny how, like, the guy's best line, which got me, was he's telling me that he can prune even though it's late in the season, like he shouldn't do it. Like, why are you giving me that pitch, dude? Like, you're saying you could do this, and then you're like, well, actually, it's late in the season. In most people's minds, it's like, yeah, it is. So what the fuck are you doing coming out here asking if we pruning when it's late in the season? Like, you should know if you're a genuine pruner. Like, what?
See, for a job interview, you don't want to talk someone out of hiring you. That's what he was doing.
Exactly. If you take anything from this story, it's not the creep factor. It's basically the job interview advice. So if you want this position, you got to make sure to sell yourself. And this guy clearly didn't.
He should have gone to Yes Employment in Thunder Bay. If anyone's from Thunder Bay, they know Yes Employment.
That's the thing. I've actually gone there and I've worked with them, and I'm actually just on an aside, like a certified job and interview coach through Yes. So it's kind of funny that you bring that up. But yeah, that's.
You could have helped them find pruning jobs.
Just imagine that. Just give them like a newspaper, or like print off a page from Indeed and be like, here are all the people that need pruning. And it's like, is that all? I would say too, it's like, do you have any other discernible skills, or can you just prune?
Is doing meth a skill?
I mean, there probably is a method to it, but oh man, like, seriously, that whole situation, what a fucking gong show. Like, oh my god.
I feel like I should point out, we tell these stories about Thunder Bay and, like, this really horrible and unfortunate murder that happened here, and this creepy guy, and stuff around Thunder Bay, because we're from there. Like, we like Thunder Bay. We're not like trashing it. We're just, any city or town has these darker elements to it, and at least in this last story, it's something you can kind of laugh at a bit because things worked out okay. But yeah, we're not dissuading anyone from checking out Thunder Bay, or there are many positive things about it. I'll leave it at that.
Exactly. And I mean, that's something I actually wrote an article one time about that, just to get it submitted to our local newspaper. And it's because they were focusing on so many negative things about Thunder Bay. I mean, if you're an outdoorsy person, like, there are some beautiful areas here, to go swimming and hiking, right? So
Just maybe
yeah,
not a quarry, but like other places,
exactly.
you know.
Um, but that's kind of like what we're getting at. It's just like anybody else who does a podcast with a local flavor to it. You're going to focus on, if it's true crime, I mean, what are you going to do? Do a positive story about your city, or talk about a true crime story that fascinates you from your hometown, right?
Yeah.
But no, the last thing I would ever want to do is shit on Thunder Bay entirely. So we would focus on the negative, but I mean, I'm genuinely happy to be here. It also gave me the most important thing in my life, which is my son. And we have a strong hockey scene too, which I got to go and see today, and or not today, but this weekend. And I'm happy to report actually that his team wound up finishing number 2 in the tournament that they had this weekend. They lost in the finals in overtime, but it is what it is. I'm really, really proud of my boy, who's a stout defenseman for his team. I don't want to give the name on on the podcast because it's not really my place, but it's a segue that I can actually kind of glow about my kids. So I'm going to take the time to do that for a moment, because I can indulge myself in that, because man, I am one proud dad.
And I think that's, that's a more positive thing to end on. Like, this was a more, darker episode. So I appreciate everyone that, was able to stick along, with the stories and listen. And, this is the silver lining is, knowing Miller's son has been doing well. And, there's always this silver lining and ray of sunshine at the end of things, usually.
And one thing I want to say as well, especially pertaining to story number 1, if you are a victim of anything remotely similar to what we discussed in terms of the 5 counts, make sure that you get the help you need. Just know there are people there that are willing to listen. There are people that can help you through it. There's therapy options, there's medication options should you need it. And if you're worried about telling anyone, just keep telling someone. Eventually, I feel that someone will listen to you and help you to get onto a path where you can work through, the trauma that you've experienced. And just know again that there is help there if you are struggling, and reach out and talk to someone.
Absolutely. I think that was incredibly well said, man. And there are always resources out there for people to utilize, and it there's always people out there, like even friends and family that want to help. So we would urge anyone to to be aware that they're not alone, exactly as you were saying.
Mm-hmm. But sincerely, thank you to everyone who took the time to listen to this and follow us from beginning to end on episode number 2 of the Milcam Sessions. We're going to try to do an episode per month if possible, but I mean, it all depends on time constraints for both of us, because this isn't our main hustle. Maybe one day it will be, but for now, we've got to do the traditional job route. And we may not be able to collaborate as much as we would like, but we will certainly try. I'm glad to know that we actually have started off 2026 with 2 episodes already, and I feel we could potentially do one in March with more research and things like that.
Oh, definitely.
But again, thank you all for taking the time to listen and to view, and to hopefully comment and share as well. And until next time, I am Miller, aka the Mill in the Milcam Sessions.
And I am Cam, the Cam in the Milcam Sessions. Thank you, everyone. And we'll sign out from here. See you hopefully in March.
Cheers.
Bye.